Ikin and Alachukwu Lucci were the couple everyone admired. To outsiders, theirs was the kind of marriage that seemed untouchable, woven with love, laughter, and mutual respect. Ikin often held Lucci's hand in public, pulling out chairs for her at small family dinners or surprising her with little tokens of affection, a silk scarf, a fresh bouquet of flowers, or her favorite palm wine from a village. His words always carried admiration. "My queen, my strength, my blessing." In the neighborhood, people whispered that Ikin was different from other men, a rare husband who knew how to treat his wife with tenderness. Lucci believed it too. After all, hadn't she watched him grow from a struggling man into one who now carried himself with dignity and pride? She never regretted giving him the wings of her late father's inheritance to fly. But behind this perfect picture lay layers Lucci never questioned. She saw herself as his partner, never suspecting her role had quietly shifted to that of a provider rather than an equal. Still, his gestures of kindness soothed her, convinced her that what they shared was genuine. On evenings when he returned home early, they would sit together on the veranda, sipping drinks, while he told her about his dreams of expanding their estate. She would smile proudly, nodding in agreement, her heart swelling with the comfort of believing she was building a legacy with a man who treasured her. In those moments, there was no hint of betrayal, only warmth and closeness. Lucci often found herself silently thanking God for her marriage. Though the world could be cruel to women who had money, she felt protected by Ikin's devotion. He never failed to praise her in front of others, never failed to show respect to her family, and always carried himself as though her happiness was his sole mission. For her, the trust was absolute. If anyone had whispered then that Ikin's love was conditional, that it was tied more to the weight of her inheritance than the warmth of her heart, she would have dismissed it as nonsense. She believed their union was unshakable, cemented by loyalty. She had no idea that her belief was only the calm before the storm. In the stillness of dawn, Lucci would sometimes watch Ikin dress for the day. The crisp shirts, the polished shoes, the confident way he tied his wristwatch. Everything about him radiated the dignity of a man she thought had fought his way out of poverty and into stability. She loved the way he carried himself, admired the way he spoke with authority, and cherished the thought that she had been a part of his rise. To her, Ikin's success was theirs. Every naira of her father's inheritance that had gone into his business or into their home felt like an investment in love, not just wealth. She found joy in watching him thrive, because she believed his triumphs were also her own. Her friends sometimes teased her for giving so much without hesitation. They reminded her that men change, that money breeds arrogance. But Lucci brushed them off. "My husband is not like that," she would say, her voice filled with calm conviction. "Ikin is different. He knows where we started from." The truth was, she trusted him more than herself. She saw the way he looked at her, at least the way she thought he looked at her, and she thought love had blinded her against suspicion. For her, sacrifice wasn't weakness, it was proof of devotion. She never considered that Ikin's heart might not carry the same weight of gratitude hers did. Every night, when they lay beside each other, Ikin would whisper good night with a smile. Sometimes he would place his arm across her waist, other times kiss her forehead gently before drifting to sleep. Small gestures, but for Lucci they were everything. They were confirmation that she was cherished, that her marriage was built on a strong foundation. She never wondered why his phone was always carefully tucked away, or why his late-night business calls sometimes lasted for hours. Love, she believed, didn't leave room for doubt. And so she silenced her questions, content in the life she thought she was living. But shadows, no matter how faint, always creep in. Ikin had begun to spend more time outside the house. At first, it was easy for Lucci to dismiss. Business ventures were expanding, he often reminded her, and such growth demanded long hours. His words made sense, and he never failed to return home with his trademark charm. Flowers on some nights, an expensive wristwatch for her on another, or simply the warmth of a smile that said, "I missed you." The gestures reassured her, masking the gnawing emptiness that sometimes stirred in her chest when she ate dinner alone. Yet, the whispers of unease grew louder in her mind. She noticed his careful handling of his phone, the way he tilted the screen away when messages popped up. She noticed the new cologne he wore occasionally, one she hadn't bought for him. And sometimes, in the middle of conversations, he would zone out, smiling faintly at something far away, as though lost in a world that had nothing to do with her. These changes were subtle, but Lucci's heart, once unshakably confident, now struggled with quiet questions she couldn't answer. Still, she silenced herself. Whenever doubt crept in, she drowned it with memories of his kindness. She told herself, "A man who treats me so well could never betray me." It was easier to believe in the image of the perfect husband than to confront the possibility that her sacrifices had birthed a man who was loyal only to her wealth. For Lucci, suspicion was not yet proof. Love gave her blinders, and she clung to them tightly. It was a small accident of timing that shattered the illusion forever. One night, thirsty and restless, Lucci stepped out of the bedroom to fetch water. The house was silent, but faint laughter drifted from the balcony. She paused, recognizing Ekine's voice. She leaned closer, expecting to hear a harmless conversation with a business partner. But what she heard instead stopped her heart mid-beat. "Ada, my love." Ekine's voice was low, smooth, dripping with affection. "Don't worry yourself. I'm only keeping Lucci because of her inheritance. Without her father's money, she's nothing to me. You're the one I want." The words slammed into her chest like a physical blow. She froze in the hallway, gripping the wall for support. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. This was the same man who kissed her forehead every night, who called her my queen, who everyone praised as a devoted husband. Her ears rang, and her heart pounded violently. If he truly meant what he said, then everything she had believed, their love, their partnership, their future, was nothing but a mask. She retreated silently into the bedroom, her face pale, her hands trembling. She didn't confront him. Instead, she lay awake in bed as he slipped in later, humming softly, kissing her cheek before falling into a peaceful sleep. Lucci stared at the ceiling all night, her chest hollow. Her husband was sleeping soundly beside her, but her marriage had just died in her heart. The next day, Ekine woke up cheerful, treating her with the same tenderness as always. He teased her about her sleepy eyes, kissed her cheek, and left for the day as though nothing had happened. But for Lucci, the world had shifted on its axis. Every gesture of affection now felt like an insult, every kind word a mask for cruelty. She replayed his late-night words again and again. I'm only keeping her because of her inheritance. For an entire week, she lived in silent torment. She wanted to confront him, to scream, to demand answers, but she held back. She wanted proof. She needed certainty before tearing her world apart. So she studied him carefully. She noticed the secretive phone calls, the way he smiled faintly at his messages, the careful excuses for late nights. She saw the signs she had ignored before, only now her eyes were wide open. But proof came slowly, and her heart boiled in the waiting. Each night, as she cooked his meals, the thought of poison crept into her mind like a shadow whispering. How easy it would be to end it all. A spoonful in his soup, a pinch in his tea, a drop in his glass of water, and his arrogant words would die with him. Yet she restrained herself. She decided to wait, to watch, to confirm. The storm inside her had only just begun. Ekine had always been careful with his phone. He carried it like a second skin, tucked it into his pocket even when he went to the bathroom, and set it face down on the table during meals. For years, Lucci had never cared. She trusted him too deeply to be curious. But now, after the phone call that shattered her world, the device became a forbidden fruit, an object that contained answers to questions she feared but desperately needed to confirm. For a week, she watched him guard it, her curiosity burning like fire. She prayed for the chance to hold it, to unlock the secrets hidden behind his passcode. One evening, the opportunity finally came. Ekine had fallen asleep on the couch after a long day, the phone slipping from his hand and landing gently on the cushion. Lucci's pulse raced as she picked it up. Her hands trembled, not from fear of being caught, but from dread of what she was about to uncover. She knew the truth was inside, waiting to pierce her heart. Using the password she had once known, she unlocked it, and with a heavy breath, entered the digital world of her husband's private life. What she saw first nearly blinded her. The screen flooded with messages from Adama, the name she had heard him whisper that night. Words of passion, promises of a future together, late-night selfies sent back and forth. I miss your touch. When will she finally leave, so I can be with you freely? The words danced before Lucci's eyes like daggers, stabbing her over and over. Her chest grew tight, her knees weak, but she forced herself to keep scrolling. She needed more. She needed to know how deep his betrayal truly ran. As her fingers swiped through his messages, Lucci's eyes caught another familiar name, one that made her stomach twist violently. Ifeoma, her younger sister. She paused, blinking rapidly, hoping her eyes had deceived her. But no, it was Ifeoma's face on the profile picture, and the messages were unmistakably flirtatious. You're the most beautiful of them all, Ikeen had written. Don't worry, I will take care of you. I can give you more than your sister ever will. Ifeoma's responses were hesitant at first, but gradually grew warmer, as though she had allowed herself to be seduced by his charm. The discovery shattered Lucci in a way that words could never capture. Betrayal from a husband was one thing, but betrayal from blood, her own sister, was beyond comprehension. She scrolled further, each message another blade carving into her heart. She read Ikeen promising to buy Ifeoma a car, sending her money for small expenses, even arranging meetings when Lucci was away. The room spun around her as she realized her sister was not just careless, but complicit, feeding Ikeen's arrogance with her silence and her replies. Tears welled to her eyes, but rage quickly replaced them. Her thoughts returned once again to poison. She imagined preparing dinner that night, stirring the soup as Ifeoma had often watched her do, only this time lacing it with death. Why not let him eat his last meal at the hands of the woman he mocked? She thought bitterly. But even as the thought boiled inside her, she forced herself to breathe. She told herself she would not act, not yet. She needed to see more. She thought she had reached the limit of betrayal until another name appeared on the screen, one that froze her blood cold. Kamsi, her best friend, the woman who had stood beside her since childhood, who had celebrated her wedding, who had cried with her when her father died. Lucci tapped the chat with trembling hands, and what unfolded felt like fire licking at her bones. Ikeen and Kamsi exchanged long, intimate conversations, secret jokes, suggestive remarks, even voice notes that carried laughter too sweet to be innocent. One message made her throat tighten. You deserve better than her, Kamsi. One day, I will give you the life you crave. And Kamsi, the friend she had trusted with her deepest secrets, replied with shameless eagerness. They had arranged secret meetings too, coffee dates, brief encounters in hotel lobbies, all under the guise of casual friendship. Lucci could almost hear Kamsi's voice in her head, laughing with her in the kitchen, all while secretly plotting to steal the very man who had already destroyed her heart. For the first time that night, Lucci dropped the phone onto her lap and buried her face in her palms. Her chest heaved as sobs broke free, though she quickly stifled them with her hands to avoid waking Ikeen. Her mind raced with poisonous thoughts. If he dies, all this dies with him. If he drinks just one cup laced with death, everything ends here. She stared at the sleeping man, her heart raging with a fury she had never known. Yet again, she restrained herself. Her rage had to wait. Her revenge needed to rip deeper than death. The following days became torture. Every time Lucci entered the kitchen, the thought of poison was there, hovering over her like a shadow. She would stand before the spice rack, staring at the hidden packet of rat poison she had once bought for pests. Her hand would hover near it, trembling with temptation. It would be so simple, she told herself. A small spoonful in his soup, and his arrogance would vanish forever. The world would see a tragic death, never knowing the justice behind it. When she served him meals, her eyes lingered on him as he ate. She imagined his throat tightening, his face contorting in pain, his body falling limp across the dining table. Sometimes she would grip the edge of the chair, suppressing the trembling in her hands as he smiled at her with the same fake warmth he had always used. Every bite he took felt like mockery, as though he was devouring her dignity along with the food. Her imagination became so vivid that she could almost taste the bitterness of poison in her own mouth. But each time she pulled herself back. Something in her whispered that killing him would be too merciful. Death was quick, instant, irreversible. No, she wanted him alive long enough to feel the ruin he had caused, to be stripped piece by piece of everything he thought he owned. She wanted to watch him fall, not into a grave, but into disgrace and emptiness. So she placed the poison back on the shelf, her rage smoldering in silence, waiting for the right moment to strike in another way. To the outside world, and even to Ikeen himself, nothing seemed different. Lucci wore the mask of a devoted wife flawlessly. She cooked his meals with her usual grace, asked about his day with soft curiosity, and even smiled when he kissed her cheek. Her silence fooled him completely. He believed his secret was safe, that his world of mistresses, sisters, and friends remained hidden under layers of lies. He never suspected that the woman sitting across from him at dinner knew everything. In private, however, Lucci's mind never rested. She studied him with the precision of a hunter, memorizing his habits, his excuses, his careless laughter when he sent messages at midnight. She noticed how he hummed softly after chatting with Adanma, how he left money envelopes in drawers for Ifeoma, how he used her car to secretly visit Kamsi. Every detail she stored away, every sin she recorded silently. Her heart was a battlefield, half longing to end him with poison, half determined to ruin him with patience. Ikeen, blinded by arrogance, failed to see the danger. He continued to call her my queen, continued to kiss her forehead at night, completely unaware that every smile she gave him was laced with venom. For Lucci, the mask of love had become her greatest weapon. She would not scream. She would not strike in haste. Instead, she would wait for the perfect moment, when her silence would roar louder than any poison ever could. The weight of Ifeoma's betrayal sat on Lucci's chest like a boulder she couldn't shake off. Days passed, yet the image of her younger sister's flirty exchanges with her husband replayed in her mind like a wound that refused to close. One morning, she invited Ifeoma over under the guise of needing help with household errands. Ifeoma came unsuspecting, humming softly as she carried groceries inside, smiling with the innocence of a sister who thought she had nothing to hide. But Lucci's eyes pierced her like a blade. After waiting until they were alone in the kitchen, Lucci silently slid her phone across the counter. On the screen, the messages glowed like fire. Ikeen's words of desire, his promises of gifts, his plans that painted Ifeoma not as a sister-in-law, but as a secret lover. Ifeoma's face drained of color instantly. Her lips trembled. Her hands shook violently as she whispered, "Sister, it's not what it looks like," but Lucci's silence was louder than thunder. She didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't even blink. She simply watched Ifeoma break apart, watched her excuses collapse under the weight of undeniable truth. The silence was suffocating. It said more than any curse could. Ifeoma fell to her knees, tears streaking her face, clutching at Lucci's hands as though begging for her soul. But Lucci pulled her hands away calmly, her expression cold and unreadable. For Lucci, that moment wasn't about punishing Ifeoma with words. It was about cutting her off with silence, so sharp it bled. Her sister had betrayed her bloodline, trampled on her trust, and fed Ikeen's arrogance. No apology could erase that. As Ifeoma sobbed uncontrollably, Lucci simply turned away, lifting her chin with dignity, leaving the younger woman to drown in shame. From that day, she no longer saw Ifeoma as her sister. She was nothing more than a ghost that had once shared her home. If confronting her sister had burned Lucci's heart, facing Kamsi felt like a dagger twisted even deeper. Kamsi had been more than a friend. She had been a sister by choice, a confidant, a woman who had held her hand in grief and danced with her in joy. To think that she had also betrayed her was almost unbearable. Lucci invited her over on a calm afternoon, serving tea as though nothing weighed on her soul. Kamsi sat comfortably, her laughter ringing in the living room, oblivious to the storm about to consume her. Then, without warning, Lucci pulled out the same phone, opening the chats with Ikeen, and placed it on the table between them. Kamsi's smile froze. Her hands, which had just been lifting the teacup, trembled so violently that the cup rattled against the saucer. She stammered excuses immediately. "It was nothing, Luch. I was lonely," he pushed. "I didn't mean to," but her words were empty echoes against the weight of her treachery. The woman who had sworn loyalty, who had laughed in Lucci's kitchen countless times, was now exposed as a snake slithering behind her back. Lucci did not cry. She did not scream. She sipped her tea slowly, her face as still as stone, watching Kamsi drown in guilt. When Kamsi reached out to hold her hand, Lucci pulled back. "You were my sister," she said finally, her voice steady but dripping with quiet rage. "But you chose to become my enemy." With those words, she stood and left the room, her silence a punishment more severe than any slap could deliver. Kamsi sat there trembling, her eyes wide with horror, realizing the bridge between them had burned to ashes. From that day forward, Kamsi was dead to Lucci. Her betrayal marked her as nothing more than another pawn in Ikeen's destructive game. The thought of poison haunted Lucci like a spirit that refused to leave. Each night, she lingered longer in the kitchen, staring at the packet hidden away, her hand hovering over it with trembling temptation. She imagined stirring it into Ikeen's tea, imagined him sipping it with a smile, unaware he was swallowing his death. She pictured his face contorting in pain, his arrogance crumbling in his last breaths. Sometimes the image gave her satisfaction, other times it filled her with dread. For a brief moment, she even placed the poison on the counter one night, holding it tightly in her palm, feeling its weight like destiny itself. But as she stood there with the poison, tears welled in her eyes. She realized that killing him would be too merciful. His suffering would last only moments, and then it would end. She didn't want it to end. She wanted him to live, to fall, to drown in his own disgrace. Death would rob her of the satisfaction of watching him stripped of everything he believed he controlled. Slowly, she placed the poison back into the cupboard, her jaw tightening with resolve. Her revenge would not come through death. It would come through disgrace, scandal, and ruin. That night, when she served him tea, she smiled softly as though nothing was wrong. He drank it happily, unaware of how close death had been to his lips. For Lucci, the decision was made. She would not poison his body. She would poison his reputation, his pride, and his life, until the man who once mocked her as nothing without her inheritance became a beggar crawling in the dirt. Her silence would be her weapon, and his arrogance would be the trap he would never escape. From that moment, Lucci transformed from a wounded wife into a calculating avenger. She began collecting everything, his late-night messages, his call logs, bank transfers to Adama, receipts for expensive gifts, photographs of their secret rendezvous. Nothing escaped her eye. Every shred of betrayal became evidence, carefully organized in folders, neatly arranged in ways that could not be denied. By day, she played the devoted wife, smiling and cooking, while by night, she built the case that would shatter him. Ikeen, blind to her growing power, continued to bask in his double life. He laughed with Adama over the phone, sent money to Ifioma, and whispered promises to Kamsi, all while Lucci sat nearby, listening silently, recording every word. The arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable made her work easier. He did not realize that the woman sitting at his side was no longer his ally, but his executioner sharpening her blade in silence. Every time she added another piece of evidence to her folder, a strange calm washed over her. She no longer wept at night, no longer trembled with fear. She had discovered a power she never knew she carried, the power of silence, of patience, of strategic revenge. With every passing day, the storm within her grew more controlled, more deliberate. She was no longer a wife waiting for love. She was a queen preparing for war. It began subtly. Lucci knew that a scandal doesn't erupt in one blow. It starts with whispers. So she leaked hints to people who mattered, anonymously, carefully. A colleague of Ekine's received a set of receipts suggesting financial impropriety. A distant relative stumbled upon photographs of him and Adanma together. A business partner heard rumors of his reckless spending. None of it pointed back to her, but the whispers began to spread like wildfire. Ekine noticed the shift, though he dismissed it at first. Friends grew colder, calls from associates became shorter, and invitations to important meetings dwindled. He shrugged it off as envy. But Lucci watched quietly as the walls began to close in on him. Each time he boasted about his control, she bit back a smile, knowing that control was slipping away piece by piece. She still cooked his meals, still played the loyal wife, but inside she was tightening the noose around his neck with every passing day. At night, when he slept peacefully beside her, Lucci would lie awake, imagining the scandal exploding fully. Imagining his face when he realized she was the one who had orchestrated it. Her silence had become more powerful than poison. Every whisper was a drop of venom. Every leaked document a deadly dose. The trap was set, and soon Ekine would step into it, blind and arrogant, never knowing that his downfall was being prepared by the very woman he thought was nothing without him. The whispers Lucci had carefully sown began to swell into a storm that could no longer be ignored. At first it was subtle, side glances during meetings, muted laughter behind Ekine's back, hushed conversations that stopped the moment he entered a room. Then came the explosion. One morning, while scrolling through his phone, he found his name plastered across a private community WhatsApp group. His chats with Adanma exposed like dirty laundry. Screenshots of his transactions, proof of his affairs, and damning receipts circulated among his peers with the speed of wildfire. Ekine's face turned pale as he realized his carefully curated image of a faithful, disciplined husband and upright businessman had been shattered overnight. He stormed out of the house, barking orders at his driver, desperate to find who had betrayed him. When he returned late that evening, his eyes were bloodshot, his hands shaking. He tossed his phone onto the table and cursed loudly. "Enemies," he muttered. "Jealous enemies want to bring me down." He paced the living room like a man trapped in a cage, too blind to realize the enemy he spoke of was the woman calmly serving him dinner in silence. Lucci set his plate before him without a word, her face serene, though inside she savored his unraveling. Every frantic phone call he made, every nervous glance at his buzzing messages, was music to her ears. For once, the man who believed he was untouchable tasted the sour flavor of fear. The scandal spread quickly beyond his circle. Former business partners avoided him. Clients quietly severed ties. Relatives began to whisper his name with shame. Ekine, the man once celebrated as a shining example of success, was now reduced to a cautionary tale whispered about in corners. He couldn't understand how everything had fallen apart so swiftly. But Lucci did. She had pulled every string, dropped every clue, and crafted his downfall with the precision of a master strategist. What poison could not do in one night, her silence had achieved in weeks. The night after the scandal broke wide, Lucci made her move. The table was set simply, as always, boiled yam, vegetable stew, and a jug of water. Ekine sat heavily in his chair, his face weary, his pride battered. He was still ranting about betrayal when Lucci calmly slid a large brown envelope across the table. He frowned, opening it quickly, only to find divorce papers neatly stacked with a detailed file of evidence, every message, every bank transfer, every proof of his betrayal. His breath caught in his throat as he flipped through the pages, his face growing paler with each damning revelation. "Lucci, my queen, please don't do this," he stammered, his once booming voice now trembling like a child's. He reached across the table to touch her hand, but she pulled it away, her eyes icy. She didn't shout. She didn't insult him. She simply sat back, her gaze sharp and unflinching. Her silence spoke louder than words. She was done. For years he had thought she was weak because she was quiet, that she would never resist him. But now he realized her silence had been the blade that cut deepest. As he pleaded, his words grew desperate, promises to change, to end his affairs, to rebuild what they had. But Lucci remained unmoved. She thought of the night she almost poisoned him and realized this moment was sweeter. Watching him beg for mercy, stripped of arrogance, was the real justice she had craved. He signed the papers reluctantly, his hands shaking, knowing he was signing away not just his marriage, but also his wealth, his pride, and the illusion of control he had built. For the first time, Ikeen saw the truth. He had underestimated the quiet woman he thought was nothing without him. The divorce proceedings were swift and merciless. With the mountain of evidence she had collected, Lucci secured everything. The properties, the accounts, the estate, all reverted fully to her name. Ikeen, who had strutted around as the master of wealth, now found himself begging his lawyers for options, but there were none. His arrogance had left him blind. He had signed too many documents carelessly, let Lucci manage too many accounts, trusted her silence too much. Now, she wielded it all like a sword, cutting away everything he thought he owned. Each hearing felt like another nail in his coffin. Former allies refused to testify on his behalf, too eager to distance themselves from his scandal. The mistresses he had courted, his false trophies, vanished when the money stopped flowing. Ikeen walked out of the courthouse one afternoon with nothing but his suit, sweat dripping from his brow, his once proud shoulders sagging. The man who had mocked his wife as nothing without her inheritance was now the one stripped bare, his pride reduced to dust. He could not face the world that once adored him. Everywhere he went, he felt eyes burning into him, laughter ringing behind him, mockery replacing admiration. At home, the emptiness was suffocating. His phone stopped buzzing with constant messages from women and business partners. Creditors called instead, demanding payments he could no longer afford. Ikeen sat in the living room that had once been filled with comfort and warmth, now reduced to a hollow shell of shame. He realized he had been living on borrowed time, and his wife, the woman he had mocked and used, had been the real master of everything. The silence of her absence was louder than any poison could have been. At first, Adanma remained by his side. She consoled him with sweet words, stroking his hair, assuring him that together they could rebuild. She whispered promises in his ear, just as he had once whispered them to her. For a brief moment, Ikeen believed her, clinging to her presence as his last hope. But Adanma was not blind. She noticed the absence of money, the lack of gifts, the silence of his once busy phone. The luxuries she had enjoyed began to vanish, replaced by excuses and debts. Days turned into weeks, and Adanma's patience thinned. She grew cold, snapping at him for his failures, refusing his touch, mocking his downfall. One evening, after a particularly heated argument over unpaid bills, she packed her bags. Her eyes, once full of feigned love, now glittered with contempt. "You're nothing without her," she spat, slamming the door behind her. Her departure was like salt rubbed into his wounds. The woman he had sacrificed his dignity for, the one he had risked everything to keep, had abandoned him when he needed her most. Ikeen sat in silence long after she left, staring at the empty space where her perfume once lingered. He thought of the nights he had held his phone to his ear, whispering promises to her, mocking the wife who gave him everything. Now both women were gone, the loyal wife who had built him and the mistress who had destroyed him. He was utterly alone, abandoned, stripped of pride and possessions. The echoes of Adanma's parting words haunted him, a cruel reminder that he had lost everything and everyone because of his own greed. While Ikeen's life descended into ruins, Lucci's world quietly blossomed. She did not gloat publicly. She didn't need to. Her silence was victory enough. Far from the scandal and the whispers, she began a new life, free of deceit and betrayal. Yet within her grew a secret no one else knew. She was pregnant. Each day, as she placed a hand on her stomach, she felt both sorrow and strength. The child inside her was innocent, untainted by its father's sins, a reminder that out of betrayal could still rise a legacy of her own making. Lucci decided the child would never know Ikeen's shame. She would raise it with dignity, teaching it strength and resilience, never revealing the full measure of its father's ruin. For her, the pregnancy was not a chain, but a symbol of survival. She carried it quietly, walking with grace, never showing the world that inside her grew the only part of Ikeen that would live on. The irony burned sweetly in her heart. While he rotted in disgrace, his bloodline would continue, but under her guidance alone. Meanwhile, Ikeen, unaware of the secret, wasted away in loneliness. He became a man haunted by silence, tormented by whispers of scandal, abandoned by everyone he thought he controlled. Each night, he lay awake in his empty home, replaying the words that had once dripped carelessly from his lips. "I'm only keeping her because of her inheritance." Now, those words were his curse. And far away, the woman he had mocked smiled quietly to herself, her hand resting on her belly, knowing she had left him with nothing but regret, while she walked away with everything that truly mattered. Please like, subscribe, and share to your friends and loved ones. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to come back for the next amazing tale yet.